A dying millionaire asked a waitress to travel with him for his last month. Then everything changed. Morning in Santa Fe began with a soft golden light spilling through the wide windows of the Bluebird Café. The gentle clink of spoons against mugs mixed with the rich aroma of roasted coffee, while an old jazz tune hummed quietly from a speaker in the corner. Emily Carter had worked here for nearly 8 years, long enough to know exactly who would walk in and when. But there was one customer who never ceased to intrigue her, the man who always sat by the window where sunlight fell like a ribbon across the worn wooden table. His name was Nathan Hale. Every morning at 7 sharp he entered the cafe, nodded politely, ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and sat silently, watching the street. For 3 months he'd never spoken more than 2 words to Emily. "Good morning," and "thank you." She'd always thought of him as one of those successful, self-contained men, someone who came here not to talk, but to escape the noise of the world. But that morning, something was different. When Emily placed his cup down, she noticed his hands trembling slightly. And this time, his gaze wasn't fixed on the street. It was fixed on his own unsteady fingers. "Are you all right, Nathan?" she asked softly. He looked up, and for the first time in 3 months, his eyes weren't distant. They were tired, haunted, but filled with something unspoken. "Emily," he said, and the sound of her name startled her. "I need to ask you something strange," he murmured, voice low and rough. "If you had only 1 month left to live, what would you do?" The cafe seemed to fall silent. The faint hiss of the espresso machine became painfully loud. Emily stared at him. Why would you ask something like that? Nathan lowered his gaze to the cup before him. "Because I just found out. That's exactly what I have." Emily froze, unsure she'd heard correctly. He gave a faint smile, one that hurt to see. "The doctors found a tumor in my brain. Inoperable. No treatment will work. They gave me 4 weeks, maybe 5 if I'm lucky." For a moment, everything around her vanished. "I'm so sorry, Nathan." He shook his head. "Don't be. I've already had my share of regret. Now I just want to live, really live, for whatever time I have left." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I have money, Emily, more than I could ever spend. But none of it ever mattered. I've built buildings, not memories. Now that I know the end is close, I want to do something reckless." Emily frowned softly. "Reckless how?" He smiled faintly. "I want to travel, drive across America, see the places I never saw, taste food I never tried, talk to people I never met. I want to feel every second as if it were my last." "That sounds beautiful," she whispered. "But why me?" Nathan met her eyes, calm and sincere. "Because I've watched you every morning, the way you smile even when you're tired, how you remember every regular's order, how you treat strangers with warmth. You have something I never had, the ability to find joy in the little things. And I want to see the world through those eyes, just once." He stopped, his gaze deep enough to pierce through every layer of her defenses. "I want you to come with me." Time seemed to freeze. The sound of the coffee machine, the clinking of spoons, the chatter from distant tables, all dissolved into a soft haze. Emily looked at him, almost certain she had misheard. What did you just say? We don't even know each other." Nathan gave a faint smile, one tinged with melancholy. "That's exactly why," he said quietly, his voice low but firm. "I don't want to spend the last days of my life with people who pity me. I want to be with someone who still knows how to be amazed by the world. Someone like you." He reached into his pocket and placed a business card gently on the table, as if laying down fate itself. "If you agree, call my assistant. You won't have to worry about a thing. Tickets, hotels, documents. I only ask..." for your company." Emily swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "And if I say no?" "Then I'll go alone," Nathan replied calmly. "No resentment, no expectations. Life has already given me more than I ever deserved." She stared at the card lying between the two coffee cups, so small, yet heavy, as the world itself. "I need time to think." "You have until tomorrow morning," he said, standing up and straightening his collar. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. "Emily, sometimes life gives us only one chance, to do something crazy, but truly worth living for." Then he walked away, leaving behind the scent of coffee, the whisper of wind, and a heart beating wildly for something Emily herself had no name for yet. Emily watched through the window, feeling something stir inside her, a mixture of fear and wonder, as if life itself had just whispered a new direction, daring her to follow. That night, Santa Fe was quieter than usual. The desert wind brushed softly through the open window of Emily's small apartment. She sat on her bed, holding the business card Nathan had left behind. The warm lamplight flickered across her thoughtful face. She kept wondering, why her? She was just a simple waitress living an ordinary life. He was successful, wealthy, and could have chosen anyone else to accompany him. Yet his words, "Come with me, just for 1 month," echoed in her mind like a gentle but haunting melody. Emily looked at an old photograph on her bedside table. It was her mother, Margaret Carter, a woman who had once told her, "Honey, don't wait for life to force you to change. Change while you still can." Her mother had died 4 years ago from cancer. Emily still remembered those final nights when her mother squeezed her hand, smiling weakly through the pain. Life isn't measured by years, sweetheart. It's measured by the moments that make you feel truly alive. Now those words returned to her like a whisper from the past. The next morning, Emily arrived early at the Bluebird Café. She went straight to the small office behind the counter, where Mr. Lewis, the elderly owner, was making coffee. "Mr. Lewis," she began nervously, "I'd like to take some time off, about a month." He looked up, raising an eyebrow. "A month? You've never taken more than 3 days. Is everything all right?" Emily hesitated. "A friend invited me on a trip, a long one." Mr. Lewis studied her face quietly. "That friend wouldn't happen to be the man by the window, would it?" She froze, then nodded. He sighed softly, then smiled. "I've seen the way he looks at you. There's something honest and sad in his eyes. If this trip helps you feel alive, go. I'll keep your spot here. The cafe will wait." Emotion welled in Emily's chest. "Thank you. Truly." At 7 sharp, Nathan walked in. Same gray jacket, same calm steps, but there was a quiet anticipation in his eyes. Emily approached his table, said nothing, and placed the business card he'd given her back on the table. She smiled. "I'll go." Nathan stared at her, almost afraid the words weren't real. "Really?" "Really?" she said, then added with a teasing seriousness, "But there are 3 conditions." He tilted his head, half amused, half curious. "First, you tell me your story. I'm not traveling with a stranger." "Fair enough," he replied. "Second, I'll pay for my own meals. You can handle tickets and hotels, but I won't feel like I'm being taken care of." He smiled softly. "Emily, I have more money than I could—" "That's my condition," she interrupted. Nathan chuckled. "All right." "And last," she said gently, "when you start to feel worse, we go home. I don't want you pushing yourself just to keep a promise." Nathan nodded, extending his hand. "Deal?" She placed her hand in his. "Deal." His hand was warm, but she could feel a faint tremor beneath his skin. Fragile, human, real. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Day after tomorrow. First stop, New York City." Emily smiled faintly. I've never been on a plane. Nathan smiled back. Outside, the morning light poured through the windows, brighter than it had in days. And as Emily looked out at the world beyond the glass, she felt something stirring inside her, a mix of fear and anticipation, as if her life was standing at the edge of a brand new chapter. 2 days later, the sky over Santa Fe was brushed with pale orange as Emily pulled her small suitcase out of the apartment. Inside, she carried only a few changes of clothes, a small notebook, and her mother's photograph. She stood before the mirror, taking a deep breath, unable to believe she was leaving the place she had called home all her life. Nathan was waiting for her at the airport, 2 plane tickets in hand. He wore a long gray coat. His smile was gentle, though his eyes were pale and tired from sleeplessness. "Are you ready?" Emily smiled faintly. "Honestly, no, but if I wait until I am, I'll never go." Nathan nodded. "Then I guess we're more alike than I thought." The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Emily gripped the handle of her suitcase, heart pounding as she walked through the gate. On the plane, Nathan took the window seat. He unfolded a map of the United States, tracing the route with his finger. New York, Charleston, Chicago, and finally, the coast of Oregon. "I've arranged everything," he said. "It's not a luxurious trip, just places worth living." Emily looked out the window as the plane ascended. The sky opened wide, sunlight streaming through the clouds. Her chest lifted with it. For the first time, she felt free. When they landed in New York City, light rain was falling. Cold winds swept through the streets, horns blared, and the city lights painted a living canvas. Emily looked around, overwhelmed. "This city, it never sleeps," she whispered. "True," Nathan smiled. "But I lived here for 3 years and never saw it as beautiful as it looks right now." They checked into a small hotel near Central Park. Nathan booked 2 separate rooms. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable," he said. Emily only smiled in gratitude. That afternoon, they walked through the park. Golden leaves carpeted the paths. People jogged, played music, and dogs chased one another near the pond. Emily paused before a street painter working on a small canvas. "He paints all day just to sell a few little pieces," she said. "But from his brushstrokes, I think he's happy." Nathan nodded. "When you do what you love, time stops mattering." As the sun went down, they stopped at a tiny café on the corner. Nathan watched her through the curl of steam rising from his cappuccino. "I used to think happiness meant having everything," he said. "A house, a car, a steady job. But when I found out I was dying, I realized happiness is just this, sitting somewhere, talking to someone, and feeling time slow down." Emily met his gaze, her voice as soft as the wind. "Maybe happiness isn't a destination, but a moment when we pause long enough to realize we're alive." A strong gust lifted her hair, and Nathan watched silently. In his eyes, there was something different, not admiration, but gratitude. The next morning, they climbed to the top of Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise. The city stretched before them, bathed in pale gold. "I used to design buildings like these," Nathan said, "but I never felt proud." "Why not?" "Because I built them just to prove I could, not to make something beautiful." Emily smiled. "Maybe people are like your buildings. What matters isn't how tall they are, but how much light they let through." Nathan said nothing. Her words stayed with him for a long time. That afternoon, they visited the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Among the ancient paintings, Emily lingered before a simple portrait. "I don't understand why people get emotional over things that have existed for centuries," she said. "Maybe," Nathan replied, "because beauty reminds us it can outlive death." She turned to him. "And you? Do you believe beauty lasts forever?" "No," Nathan said, "but I believe there are moments, brief ones, worth living an entire life for. When they left the museum, a sudden drizzle began. They ran to shelter under a doorway. Nathan laughed, a rare, unguarded laugh Emily had never seen. "I can't remember the last time I truly laughed," he said. "Maybe it's now," she answered, her eyes bright beneath the rain. That night, in the hotel room, Nathan suddenly clutched his head. The pain struck hard, making him lean over, face pale. Emily rushed to him in panic. "Nathan, are you okay?" He struggled to breathe evenly. "Just one of the episodes. We need to go to a hospital." He shook his head, forcing a faint smile. "No, it'll pass." Emily sat beside him, holding his trembling hand. She could feel the fragile, uneven rhythm of his heartbeat. After a few minutes, the pain subsided. Nathan opened his eyes, exhausted but calm. "You didn't panic," he whispered. "Most people would have run." "I couldn't," she said softly. "Because I know what terrifies us most isn't death, it's not having lived enough." Nathan looked at her for a long time. In that gaze, something shifted, as if an invisible thread had just bound two lost hearts together. Later that night, when the city finally slept, Emily opened her window. The distant lights reflected against the clouds like quiet stars. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. And she knew this journey had already begun to change them both. After 3 days in New York, they left the city on a southbound train. Through the window, the scenery gradually changed. Skyscrapers gave way to endless cotton fields and the soft blue skies of the American South. Emily leaned back in her seat, the breeze brushing through her hair. She had never thought a journey could make someone feel so light. Nathan sat across from her, sketchbook in hand. He drew nonstop, bridges, rooftops, faces of strangers. "I like to record everything," he said when he noticed her curious glance. "To remind myself that beauty still exists, even if it's fleeting." Emily smiled. Maybe beauty only needs to exist for a moment to be remembered for a lifetime. When the train reached Charleston, the afternoon light bathed the old city in gold. Cobblestone streets, pastel-colored houses, the faint scent of magnolia in the air. Jazz music drifted from a small street bar, mingling with the distant sound of the sea. Emily looked around, eyes wide with wonder. "This city feels like something out of a dream." Nathan nodded. "And you're standing inside it." They rented a small room near the harbor. That evening, they walked beneath a canopy of trees. The warm yellow glow of street lamps painted everything in a soft, peaceful haze. "Are you afraid of dying?" Nathan asked suddenly. Emily was quiet for a while. "When my mother died of cancer, I thought I was so afraid I didn't want to live anymore. But then I realized what's worse than death is living and feeling nothing." He nodded, his eyes distant. "I used to think I'd be terrified if I were dying. But truth is, I just feel regret that I never truly lived." They stopped by a small café where a band was playing. The violin blended with the raspy voice of the singer, slowing time itself. Nathan held out his hand. "Dance with me." "I don't know how," she laughed. "I'm not any better," he replied, and under the golden lights of Charleston's old streets, they touched hands and moved gently to the rhythm. In that moment, they forgot everything: illness, fear, even time itself. The next day they walked along the beach. Sunlight shimmered over the water like millions of tiny crystals. Emily slipped off her shoes and stepped barefoot onto the sand. "My mother used to say," she began, "life is like a kaleidoscope, the same light, the same pieces of glass, but each turn creates a new pattern. The question is which way we choose to look." Nathan smiled. "She must have been a wise woman." "She died 4 years ago," Emily said softly. "Lung cancer. I took care of her during her last months. When she passed, I felt like I went dark with her." Nathan stopped. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't know." "It's all right. Pain softens with time. Maybe that's why I understand you. The feeling that everything beautiful is fragile." They walked in silence. The only sounds were the waves and the wind. "Is that why you agreed to come with me?" Nathan asked. "No," she answered honestly. "I came because I saw something in your eyes that few people still have. Hope, even knowing you're running out of time." Nathan turned to her, his gaze deep and unspoken, as if the whole sky lived inside his eyes. That night, they dined at a small riverside restaurant. Lights shimmered over the water, painting everything like a living painting. Nathan spoke about his childhood, about his strict architect father, and how he followed in his footsteps simply because he was too afraid not to. "I spent my whole life doing what others expected," he said, "until I realized no one else can live my life for me." Emily listened quietly, her fingers gently circling the rim of her glass. "I think we only truly live when we dare to choose the path that makes our hearts tremble," she said. "Even if it's short, even if it's wrong, at least it's ours." They fell silent, watching the moonlight ripple on the river. Then Nathan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've never loved anyone, Emily. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid. Afraid that once they saw who I really am, they'd leave." She looked at him gently. "Maybe love isn't about finding someone who takes away your fear, but someone who makes you brave enough to face it." Their eyes met. A long silence lingered between them, yet within that silence, something fragile began to bloom, a feeling as real and delicate as the Charleston light that evening. When they left the restaurant, the wind carried the scent of salt and the distant sound of music. Emily tilted her head toward the sky, gazing at the stars. "Do you ever think," she asked, "that the briefest things are the most beautiful?" Nathan smiled softly. "I've started to believe that, ever since I met you." And in that peaceful night, beneath the golden glow and the sound of the waves, they both knew. Something inside them had changed forever. A week later, they left Charleston on a short flight to Chicago. The city unfolded beneath a gusty afternoon sky, a sheet of gray draped over towering buildings, Lake Michigan stretching endlessly like a giant mirror reflecting the cold autumn light. Emily pulled her coat collar tight, shivering slightly against the wind. Nathan walked beside her, hands tucked into his pockets, coughing now and then. She noticed he looked paler than before, though he tried to hide it behind a faint smile. "Chicago doesn't seem as gentle as Charleston, does it?" she joked. "No," he replied, eyes following the bare trees lining the street. "But I think every city has its own soul. New York is restless, Charleston is dreamy, and Chicago is honest. It doesn't hide its scars." His words left Emily silent. She thought, maybe Nathan was like Chicago, carrying both beauty and pain, no longer trying to conceal either. That evening, they went to a small pizza place in Lincoln Park. Inside, the warm yellow lights and the smell of melting cheese mingled with the laughter of diners. "I used to come to Chicago for work," Nathan said as the waiter set the pizza down. "I'd sign contracts, meet clients, spend nights in hotels, but I never really saw the city. And now? Now I regret it. Regret living so long like a shadow." Emily smiled, slicing a piece of pizza, her voice gentle but firm. "Maybe the best part of your life began the moment you thought it had ended?" Nathan looked at her and laughed quietly. "You always know how to make me want to live a little longer." "Then do it," she said softly. "At least for today." When they stepped outside, heavy rain poured down. The streets shimmered with reflections of red and gold lights. They ran through puddles, laughing like children. In the middle of the downpour, Nathan suddenly stopped. Emily turned to see him standing under a street lamp, rain streaming down his face, his breath uneven. "Nathan, what's wrong?" He stepped closer, eyes locked on hers. "I lied to you, Emily." Her brows furrowed. "About what?" "When I said I'd never loved anyone." He swallowed hard. "The truth is, I have. I love you. Since the second time I saw you in that café, when you smiled at that old man everyone else ignored. I didn't know why, but I knew right then I wanted to be near you, even in silence." Emily stood still, rain dripping from her hair. Her heart trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of his words. "Then why did you lie?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I told you, you'd pity me. Afraid you'd suffer when I'm gone." She stepped closer, voice shaking. "You're such a fool. You think I came with you out of pity?" He didn't answer. "I love you, Nathan. I think I started loving you that morning you asked me that question. Not because I felt sorry for you, but because you faced the greatest fear a person can, knowing you're dying, yet choosing to live anyway." The rain fell harder. Under the amber glow of the streetlight, surrounded by water and wind, they stood close enough to feel each other's breath. Nathan lifted a trembling hand to her cheek, his eyes shining with emotion. "I don't deserve to be loved." "No one has to deserve love, Nathan. You just have to be brave enough to let it in." And then, without another word, he leaned down. Their lips met in the rain, soft, deep, and achingly real, as if the world dissolved and only they remained, breathing the same fragile breath. The kiss wasn't rushed or dramatic. It was a silent promise between two souls who had walked through fear and found each other in the fragile space of being alive. That night, they returned to the hotel in silence. Nathan held her hand tightly, as if afraid time itself might steal the moment away. Emily rested her head on his shoulder, listening to his faint but steady heartbeat. At the door to their rooms, she turned to him and whispered, "Do you know what the scariest thing is?" "What?" "Knowing you'll lose someone, and loving them anyway." Nathan looked at her and smiled sadly. "Then I guess I'm just as scared as you are." Nathan took her hand and pulled her close. There were no more words, only an embrace, slow, lingering, as if they feared the world would shatter if they let go. Two lost souls had finally found each other, not to escape, but to be themselves. No fear, no pretending to be strong, only hearts beating to the same rhythm. That night, they didn't need to speak. Each other's warmth was the only language. The sound of their hearts mingled with the soft rain outside the window. The entire city lay silent, leaving only the two of them sitting in that gentle darkness where fear melted into love. When dawn came, the first light slipped through the curtains and brushed across Emily's sleeping face. Nathan had been awake for a long time. He lay still, quietly watching her. She was on her side, hair spilling across the pillow, breathing steady, so peaceful it made him forget his pain. In that moment, time stopped. There was no tomorrow, no illness, only her, the woman who made him want to live a little longer, just to see that smile one more time. He raised his hand, lightly brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, afraid to wake her, afraid to break the dream. But tears welled up and spilled over, not because he feared death, but because he knew he would have to leave behind the most beautiful thing life had ever given him. He whispered softly, knowing she couldn't hear, "Thank you for making my death no longer frightening. Thank you for showing me what it means to be loved, even if only for a moment." His voice caught. A tear fell onto her hand. Emily stirred slightly, opening her eyes in a daze. "Nathan?" He quickly wiped his tears and smiled. "It's nothing. I'm just watching the sunrise." She smiled faintly, nestling her head against his shoulder. "Don't lie. You're thinking something sad." "No," he murmured. "I'm just thinking. If this is the last morning I wake up and see you, then it's enough." Emily stayed silent, holding his hand tighter. Outside, Chicago woke with the sound of car horns and bright light. Inside, two people sat in stillness, fingers intertwined, trying to hold on to every remaining second. Nathan tilted his head and kissed her forehead, gently, like a prayer. "I love you, Emily," he whispered, "and I will love you in every sunrise you still see." And she, half awake, only tightened her grip on his hand and whispered, "Then let's watch many more sunrises together, Nathan." Light flooded the room, and in that moment, even knowing what awaited them, they both felt time stop, just long enough to hold on to that image. Two people, two souls, living fully inside the final moment of love. 2 weeks later, they set out for the final stop of their journey, the Oregon coast. The flight from Chicago was long, and Nathan looked weaker than before. The cough came more often, and every time he winced, Emily felt her heart tighten. When the plane landed in the small city of Astoria, the salty air of the sea filled their lungs. The sky was painted silver gray, clouds drifting so low they seemed almost within reach. Emily gently squeezed his hand. "Are you okay?" Nathan smiled, his voice hoarse but warm. "I'm where I want to be, with the person I want to be with. That's enough." They rented a small car and drove along the Pacific Coast Highway. On both sides, dark green pine forests stretched out, with steep cliffs dropping straight into the ocean. Waves crashed hard against the rocks, spraying white foam like smoke. Emily rolled down the window, letting the cold wind rush in, carrying with it the scent of salt and freedom. "I've dreamed of coming here since I was a kid," Nathan said when they stopped on a hill overlooking the sea. "My father always said the Oregon coast is where the earth meets the sky. I think maybe this is the perfect place to end." Emily took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Not an ending, a pause before something else begins." Nathan smiled, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "You always know how to make things less frightening." They stayed in a small room on a hill, facing the sea. Each morning, Emily woke early, made coffee, and opened the curtains to let the light flood in. Nathan often sat on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, staring into the distance. He didn't talk much anymore, only smiled whenever she looked his way. On the first day, they walked on the cold sand. The wind blew hard, but Emily held his hand tightly, afraid that if she let go, he would dissolve, like mist. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice weak. "Afraid of what?" "The moment when I'm gone." She was silent, then softly said, "Yes, but I'm more afraid of never having met you." Nathan turned, his eyes shining with a gentle light she would remember all her life. On the second day, Nathan was so weak he had to rest most of the time. Emily read to him, sometimes just in a quiet, steady voice against the backdrop of waves. He liked listening to her, not for the story, but because her voice made him feel he was still here, still alive. That afternoon, as the sun began to sink, Nathan whispered, "You know, I used to think I understood what courage was. But it turns out courage isn't facing death. It's living fully, even knowing it will end." Emily held his hand, tears falling before she even realized. "You've done that, Nathan." "No," he murmured. "You're the one who taught me how." On the third day, Nathan struggled to get up. "I want to go outside," he said. "It's cold." "Just for a little while. I want to see the sunset. One last time." She helped him into his coat, wrapped a scarf around him, then guided him to the car. They drove to Ecola State Park, where a trail led up to a high bluff overlooking the Pacific. With every step, Nathan had to pause to catch his breath, but he kept smiling, holding her hand tightly. Promise me one thing?" he asked as they stopped on an old wooden bench. "Anything. After I'm gone, you have to keep living. Go and see the world. Don't stop just because you're afraid of remembering me." Emily shook her head, her voice breaking. "I can't. I'll never love anyone else." "You will," he said, light as wind. "And when that happens, remember, love isn't holding on, it's letting the other person be free. I don't want to be a chain on your heart. I want to be your wings." She broke into sobs. "How can you be so calm?" "Because you taught me that courage isn't being unafraid. It's acting even when you are." They reached the top just as the sun began to sink into the sea. The sky blazed with streaks of orange, purple, and gold. Waves crashed against the cliffs, rising in mist. Nathan sat down, exhausted but at peace. "It's beautiful," he whispered, "just like in my dreams." Emily sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," he said after a long silence. "For what?" "For making the last month of my life the most beautiful one." "Thank you," she replied, "for making my whole life feel like a month worth living." They sat there, saying nothing more. The sun sank lower, leaving only pale light on the sea. Nathan turned to her, placed his hand on her cheek, and whispered, "Will you promise to remember me?" "I promise. And when you see other sunsets, believe that I'm there, in every color." He smiled. "I love you, Emily, more than I can ever say." "I love you too, forever." Then he slowly closed his eyes. One breath, then two. The sea still crashed, the wind still blew, and Nathan, who had once only existed, had finally truly lived. Emily rested her head on his shoulder, letting her tears blend with the wind and salt. The sky deepened into purple, and when the first star appeared, she knew he was gone, peacefully as he had lived in his final days. That night, she didn't cry much. She only sat quietly, looking at the sea, still holding the hand that had grown cold. She whispered into the sound of the waves, "Thank you, Nathan, for teaching me that love doesn't need to be long, only deep enough." And as the wind passed through, she felt as if he were still there, in the scent of the sea, in the sunset, in every breath of the world. 3 days after Nathan's passing, Emily sat on a plane bound for Santa Fe. Outside, the sky was covered in a blanket of gray clouds, but through them, sunlight still slipped in, faint yet persistent, like the promise Nathan had once made. "I'll be in every sunrise you see." On her lap was Nathan's urn. She held it close to her chest, as if embracing him one last time, tears streaming down her cheeks. A flight attendant approached gently. "Are you okay, miss?" Emily gave a small smile. "Thank you, I'm fine." When the plane landed, the Santa Fe sky was clear and full of sunlight. Emily drove to the old brick house where Nathan's family lived, a red brick home surrounded by rows of golden maple trees. Evelyn Hale, Nathan's mother, opened the door. She already knew Emily through brief calls and the letters her son had sent home during his journey. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. There was only silence, a silence heavy with understanding and grief. Emily handed her the wooden box. "He wanted to be close to home," she whispered. Evelyn took it with trembling hands, her fingers brushing the surface as though touching her son's face. "Thank you," she murmured. "You did what we couldn't." "He taught me how to live," Emily replied softly. "I only walked with him on his last road." The older woman embraced her tightly, as if holding a piece of Nathan's soul. When Emily turned to leave, she glanced back and saw the window on the second floor open, the curtain fluttering in the wind. She didn't know whether it was the wind or him, only that something warm had just touched her heart. That night, in her small apartment, Emily sat by the window, moonlight seeping through the thin curtain. She took a deep breath and opened the letter Nathan had left on the nightstand, beside the words written by hand. Open when you're ready to move on. To my dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side. I don't know how to thank you enough. You came to me not out of pity nor curiosity, but because of something rare and true, kindness. You made the last month of my life the most complete time I've ever known. I lived, laughed, and loved, all because of you. Inside the wooden box, you'll find my sketchbook. On the last page, I wrote the name of something new, the Horizon Project. It's yours now, along with enough to start the cafe you once dreamed of. A place where people can find hope again. Build it near the sea. I know you'll find the right place. And when a sad stranger sits alone in a corner, do what you once did for me. Smile, ask how they're doing, remind them the world still cares. I want you to live, Emily, to go, to see, to love, and not to fear pain. I love you. Nathan. Tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. Emily pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. She could hear the sea, or perhaps only memory, but in her heart she knew he had never truly left. 2 years passed. On the Oregon coast, the sun was setting behind the cliffs. The sky was covered in gold and violet hues, just like the evening they had shared together for the last time. Emily walked slowly along the sandy path, holding the hand of a small boy about 2 years old. He had soft gray eyes and a gentle smile, the smile she had once loved. He squeezed her hand, pointing toward the horizon, babbling, "Mommy, is the sun going to sleep?" "Yes," Emily said, bending down. "But it'll wake up again tomorrow and light the whole world." "Like Daddy?" She smiled, eyes glistening. "Like Daddy." They stopped at a small patch of land overlooking the sea. Emily placed a bouquet of white wildflowers on the ground. "He once said," she whispered, "life is a journey, not a destination. And now I know he's still traveling, in every wave, every wind, every glimmer of this twilight." The boy looked at her, then out to the distance. "Daddy's there, isn't he, Mommy?" "Yes, my love," she smiled. "Daddy's wherever the light is." She lifted him into her arms, kissed his forehead, and began to walk away. Behind them, the sun sank lower, leaving the sky ablaze, as if the world itself were remembering. The waves kept rolling, steady and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of someone eternal. And when she turned back one last time, the final light of day shimmered across the sea, warm, beautiful, and everlasting, just like the love they had lived, even if only for a single precious month.